Once upon a time, in the lively city of Uyo, there lived a beautiful lady named Grace. Grace was 32 years old, and she had a heart as warm as the sun. She lived in a cozy little house with her husband, Donald. They had been married for 5 years, and their love for each other was as strong as a towering oak tree. However, there was a sadness in Grace's heart. Despite their deep love, Grace and Donald faced a challenge that made their days difficult. They didn't have any children. Grace longed to hear the pitter-patter of little feet and the sound of children's laughter filling their home. Welcome to AfroTales TV, your home for rich, exciting, and inspiring stories from around the world. Today's story will touch your heart and keep you hooked till the very end. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our amazing stories. Donald had a job that kept him away from home for long periods. He had to travel far for work, leaving Grace alone for weeks at a time. Although they talked on the phone every day, Grace missed her husband terribly when he was away. One sunny morning, as Grace sat in her garden, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and birds chirped happily in the distance. She closed her eyes and dreamed of a day when she and Donald would have children of their own. She imagined their home filled with laughter and joy, with children playing happily in every corner. Suddenly, Grace heard a voice calling her name. She opened her eyes to see her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, standing at the garden gate with a basket of fresh vegetables. "Good morning, Grace," Mrs. Thompson greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Grace replied, returning the smile. "What brings you here today?" "I brought you some vegetables from my garden," Mrs. Thompson said, holding out the basket. "I thought you might like them." "Thank you so much, Mrs. Thompson," Grace said gratefully, accepting the basket. "You're always so kind to me." "It's my pleasure, dear," Mrs. Thompson said. "Is everything all right? You seem a bit lost in thought today." Grace sighed softly and looked down at the vegetables in her hands. "I'm just feeling a little lonely, that's all," she admitted. "Donald has been away for a long time, and I miss him terribly, and we still haven't been blessed with children." Mrs. Thompson's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand, my dear, but don't lose hope. Sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them." Grace smiled weakly, grateful for Mrs. Thompson's words of comfort. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'll try to keep believing that someday our dream will come true." With a final wave, Mrs. Thompson bid Grace goodbye and went back to her own house. Grace watched her go, feeling a little lighter in her heart. As the day went on, Grace found solace in her garden, tending to her flowers and plants. She watered them tenderly and whispered words of encouragement as if they were her own children. And as she worked, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope stirring inside her. Night fell, and Grace went inside her house, feeling tired but content. She cooked herself a simple dinner and ate it quietly, thinking of Donald and praying for his safe return. As she got ready for bed, Grace looked out of the window at the starry sky above. She made a wish on the brightest star, a wish for happiness and love, for her and Donald, and for the family they hoped to have one day. With a sigh, Grace climbed into bed and closed her eyes, drifting off to sleep with a hopeful heart. As the days passed, Grace found herself sinking deeper into the loneliness of her marriage. With Donald away for work most of the time, she longed for companionship and affection. It was during one of her solitary outings to a local cafe that she met David. David was a charming man with a warm smile and a twinkle in his eye. He struck up a conversation with Grace, and before long, they found themselves lost in each other's company. They talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter as if they had known each other for years. Their connection was instant, like two pieces of a puzzle fitting perfectly together. Grace felt a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time, and she found herself drawn to David in a way she couldn't explain. As they parted ways that evening, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she had found something special in David. She thought about him constantly, his laughter ringing in her ears like music. Days turned into weeks, and Grace found herself spending more and more time with David. They went for walks in the park, shared meals at cozy restaurants, and talked for hours on end. With David, Grace felt alive and happy in a way she hadn't felt in years, but deep down, she knew that what she was doing was wrong. She was married to Donald, and she had made a vow to love and honor him. Yet she couldn't deny the strong pull she felt towards David, the way he made her heart flutter and her pulse quicken with just a smile. One evening, as they sat together in a secluded corner of the cafe, David took Grace's hand in his and looked into her eyes with love and longing. "Grace, my dear," he said softly, "I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Grace's heart skipped a beat at his words. She looked into David's eyes, feeling torn between love and loyalty. "Oh, David," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what to say." David's expression softened with understanding. "I know it's complicated, Grace, but I love you more than anything in this world. Please, give us a chance to be together." Grace's mind was in turmoil as she struggled to make sense of her feelings. She knew that choosing David meant betraying Donald, the man she had promised to love and cherish. But she couldn't deny the overwhelming love she felt for David, the way he made her feel alive and whole again. "I need time to think," Grace finally said, pulling her hand away gently. "This is all happening so fast, and I need to sort out my feelings." David nodded understandingly, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "Of course, Grace. Take all the time you need. Just know that my love for you will never waver." With a heavy heart, Grace bid David goodbye and made her way home. She felt torn between two worlds, unsure of which path to take. Deep down, she knew that whatever choice she made would change her life forever. But for now, she needed time to think, to weigh the consequences of her actions, and to listen to the voice of her heart. As days passed, Grace found herself torn between two worlds. On one hand, there was David, the charming man who had swept her off her feet with his love and affection. And on the other hand, there was Donald, her husband whom she had promised to love and cherish. After much soul-searching, Grace made the difficult decision to accept David's proposal and marry him. They had a small wedding with just few friends from David's side, and Grace felt a rush of happiness as she exchanged vows with David. But amidst the joy of their union, a cloud of guilt lingered in Grace's heart. She knew that she was keeping a dark secret from both David and Donald, a secret that had the power to shatter their lives. But the fear of losing both men kept her trapped in her web of deceit, and she continued to juggle her two marriages with practiced ease. Juggling two marriages proved to be a daunting task for Grace. She became a master of deception, carefully planning her days to ensure she could spend time with David, while still maintaining her facade with Donald. Lies flowed effortlessly from her lips as she concocted excuses for her whereabouts whenever she switched between her husbands. "Sorry, honey, I had to work late at the office," Grace would say to Donald, her voice laced with false remorse. "It's all right, dear, I understand," Donald would reply, unaware of the truth behind her words. Meanwhile, with David, Grace would spin a different tale to explain her absences. "I had to help my friend with an emergency," she would say, her eyes downcast with feigned concern. "I hope everything is okay," David would say, his brow furrowed with worry. As the days went by, Grace found herself sinking deeper into her web of lies, the weight of her guilt bearing down on her like a heavy burden. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, one that could have devastating consequences if she were ever discovered. But despite her guilt, Grace couldn't bring herself to end either of her marriages. She was torn between her love for David and her loyalty to Donald, unable to choose between the two men who held her heart in their hands. And so, she continued to live a double life, moving through her days with a smile on her face and a heavy heart in her chest. She knew that she was walking a dangerous tightrope, one that could collapse at any moment and send her tumbling into the abyss. But for now, Grace remained trapped in her tangled web of deceit, unable to break free from the lies that threatened to consume her. And as each day passed, the walls of her carefully constructed facade began to crumble, inch by agonizing inch, until there was nothing left but the truth, waiting to be revealed. As time marched on, Grace's double life became increasingly precarious. The constant fear of discovery weighed heavily on her mind like a dark cloud looming over her every move. Despite the growing unease in her heart, she couldn't muster the courage to end either of her marriages. She found herself trapped in a relentless cycle of lies, her days consumed by the need to keep up appearances with both Donald and David. Every moment spent with one husband was tainted by the guilt of betraying the other. Grace felt like she was tiptoeing on thin ice, afraid that one wrong step would send her crashing into the icy depths below. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find a way to extricate herself from the tangled knot she had woven. One day, as Grace sat alone in her house, the weight of her deception pressing down on her like a heavy burden, she received a phone call from David. "Hey Grace, are you free tonight?" David's voice came through the receiver, warm and familiar. Grace's heart skipped a beat at the sound of his voice. Yeah, I think so," she replied, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Great. I was thinking we could go out for dinner and catch a movie afterward. What do you say?" David asked eagerly. Grace hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, she longed to spend time with David, to lose herself in his embrace, and forget about the tangled mess of her life for just a little while. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at her conscience like a hungry beast. "Sure, that sounds lovely," Grace finally said, forcing a smile onto her face. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7, David said cheerfully before hanging up. As Grace put down the phone, she felt a wave of despair wash over her like a crashing wave. She knew that every moment spent with David was a moment stolen from Donald, her husband who trusted her implicitly, and yet she couldn't bring herself to end the charade, to confess her sins and face the consequences of her actions. That evening, as she got ready to meet David, Grace looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw the hollow eyes of a woman who had lost herself in a web of lies. She felt like a puppet on strings, dancing to the tune of her own deceit, unable to break free from the chains that bound her. As she stepped out of the house and into the cool night air, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that her world was spiraling out of control. She knew that she was playing a dangerous game, one that could have devastating consequences if she were ever discovered. But for now, she remained trapped in the tangled knot of her own making, unable to find a way out. And as she climbed into David's car and drove off into the night, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up the charade before it all came crashing down around her. One fateful day, fate intervened in Grace's carefully constructed world when Donald and David crossed paths at a business conference. It was a coincidence that neither of them could have predicted, and it would change everything. Donald and David found themselves sitting next to each other during a seminar, exchanging pleasantries and sharing stories about their lives. They had no idea that they were connected by a common thread, a woman who held both of their hearts in her hands. As they chatted, Donald couldn't help but boast about his beautiful wife, Grace. He pulled out his phone and proudly showed David a picture of her, a smile lighting up his face as he talked about her with love and admiration. "This is Grace," Donald said, holding up the phone for David to see. "Isn't she just stunning?" David's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the picture of Grace, his wife. His mind raced with confusion as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. How could Donald know Grace? And more importantly, how could Grace be married to both of them? Unaware of the bombshell he was about to drop, Donald continued to sing Grace's praises, completely oblivious to the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. "She's the light of my life," Donald said, his voice filled with pride. "I'm the luckiest man in the world to have her as my wife." David's mind was in turmoil as he struggled to come to terms with the revelation. He felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him, leaving him adrift in a sea of confusion and disbelief. "Donald, I need to tell you something," David said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I know Grace too. In fact, she's my wife." Donald's eyes widened in shock as David's words sank in. He looked at David, his mind reeling with disbelief. "What do you mean, she's your wife?" Donald asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "I mean exactly what I said. Grace and I are married. I had no idea. I had no idea she was married to you too." The two men stared at each other in stunned silence, the weight of the truth hanging heavy in the air between them. They were both victims of Grace's deception, both caught in the tangled web of her lies. As the reality of the situation sank in, anger and betrayal bubbled up inside them like a raging storm. They felt like fools, duped by the woman they had loved and trusted with all their hearts. But amidst the turmoil of their emotions, there was a glimmer of clarity. They knew that they had to confront Grace and demand answers, to unravel the truth behind her web of deceit and reclaim their lives from the chaos she had wrought. And so, with hearts heavy with betrayal and minds ablaze with determination, Donald and David set out to confront Grace and uncover the secrets that had torn their lives apart. Little did they know, the truth they sought would shake them to their core and change their lives forever. Determined to confront Grace about her deceit, Donald and David wasted no time in making their way to Donald's house. They had been blindsided by the revelation that Grace was leading a double life, and they couldn't bear to let her continue her charade any longer. As they stood before her, their hearts heavy with disappointment and betrayal, Grace's facade crumbled like a house of cards in a strong wind. She looked at them with tear-filled eyes, her shoulders slumped with shame and regret. "Grace, how could you?" Donald's voice was filled with pain as he stared at his wife, the woman he had trusted with his heart. David's expression was a mixture of hurt and anger as he confronted the woman he had thought was his soulmate. "I trusted you, Grace. I loved you with all my heart, and you lied to me." Grace hung her head, unable to meet their accusing gazes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I never meant to hurt either of you. I was just so afraid of losing both of you." Donald's eyes softened slightly at the sound of her voice, but the hurt in his heart was still raw and tender. "Why, Grace? Why did you do it?" Grace took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts as she struggled to find the words to explain her actions. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I was lonely, and I felt trapped in my marriage to Donald. And then I met David, and he made me feel alive again. I know it's no excuse for what I did, but I couldn't help myself." David's anger flared at her words, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You couldn't help yourself?" he repeated incredulously. "You destroyed 2 lives because you couldn't help yourself?" Grace recoiled at the sharpness in his tone, her heart breaking into a million pieces at the pain she had caused. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, please believe me when I say that I never meant to hurt either of you." The air was heavy with tension as Grace, Donald, and David faced the harsh reality of Grace's deception. They sat in the living room of Donald's house, the silence weighing heavily upon them like a suffocating blanket. Words were exchanged, emotions ran high, and wounds were reopened as they grappled with the pain of betrayal. Donald's voice trembled with hurt as he recounted the years of trust and love that Grace had shattered with her lies. "I thought we had something special, Grace," Donald said, his voice choked with emotion. "I trusted you with my heart, and you betrayed me." Grace hung her head, unable to meet his accusing gaze. "I'm so sorry, Donald," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never meant to hurt you." David's anger burned bright as he confronted the woman he had thought was his soulmate. "You tore my heart in 2, Grace," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "I loved you with everything I had, and you threw it all away." Grace reached out a trembling hand towards him, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. "David, please," she begged. "I know I messed up, but I still love you. Please don't leave me." But David pulled away from her touch, his heart hardening with resolve. "I can't do this, Grace," he said, his voice filled with finality. "I can't be with someone who can't be honest with me. It's over." Grace's heart shattered into a million pieces at his words, the pain of his rejection cutting her to the core. She had lost the two men she loved most in the world, and it was all her fault. Donald's expression softened slightly as he looked at Grace, his heart breaking for the woman he had once called his wife. "Grace, I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said quietly, "but I don't want to see you suffer. You need to move on with your life and find a way to make things right." Grace nodded numbly, her mind reeling with the weight of her mistakes. She knew that she had a long road ahead of her, one filled with pain and regret. But she also knew that she had to face the consequences of her actions and find a way to atone for the damage she had caused. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Grace was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. With both Donald and David gone, she found herself adrift in a sea of loneliness and regret. The weight of her deceit hung heavy upon her shoulders, a constant reminder of the pain she had inflicted on those she loved. Alone in her empty house, Grace felt the full force of her mistakes crashing down upon her like a tidal wave. She had lost everything: her marriage, her love, her sense of self, all because of her inability to be honest with herself and those around her. But amidst the darkness of her despair, a glimmer of hope began to flicker deep within her heart. She knew that she couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to move forward from it. She could let her mistakes define her, or she could use them as stepping stones towards a brighter future. With newfound determination, Grace vowed to learn from her mistakes and strive to become a better person. She enrolled in therapy sessions to address the root causes of her deception and to learn healthier ways of coping with her emotions. She also sought out support from friends and family, leaning on them for strength and guidance as she navigated the rocky road to redemption. But the journey was far from easy. There were days when Grace felt overwhelmed by guilt and shame, when the weight of her past mistakes threatened to drag her down into the depths of despair once more. But she refused to give up. She knew that she owed it to herself and to those she had hurt to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Grace began to see glimmers of progress. She learned to forgive herself for her past mistakes, understanding that she was only human and that everyone makes errors in judgment from time to time. She also reached out to Donald and David, expressing her heartfelt apologies for the pain she had caused and her hopes for reconciliation in the future. Though it was a painful process, Grace knew that she was on the path to redemption. She had faced her demons head-on and emerged stronger and wiser for it. And though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, she walked it with her head held high, knowing that she was capable of overcoming any obstacle that stood in her way. And as she looked towards the future with renewed hope and determination, Grace knew that she had finally found the strength to rise from the ashes of her past and build a brighter tomorrow for herself and those she held dear. For in the end, it was not the mistakes we make that define us, but the way we choose to rise above them and strive for a better tomorrow. Thank you for watching this story on AfroTales TV. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, leave us a comment, and share with friends and family. We have more beautiful stories coming your way, so subscribe and stay tuned. See you in the next one.